Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. I'm so excited to talk to the author of The House on Rondo, Debra J. Stone. And I also want to show off our new posters. I finally got printed out. You can find these all for free to download on our website. We have our new one here for Read Your World Day 2026 and for our new classroom kit about bilingualism. But I'm so excited to be talking to Debra today. This is a really wonderful middle grade book, and it also shares an important part of history, specifically about St. Paul, Minnesota, which I actually I lived there for 4 years, and this is history that I never knew, even though it actually took place less than 10 minutes from where I lived. Of course, I was there 30 years later, but this wasn't something that was talked about, and for the most part, has kind of been swept under the rug a little bit, which is why it's so wonderful that Ms. Stone has brought it to light in this wonderful book. It's a work of fiction, but based on a lot of research. And as she mentions in the book, it's something that is really hard to find through archival research. So it's really wonderful that she's brought it to light. And this is about when I-94 was built and connecting St. Paul and Minneapolis, and going right through a thriving Black community in St. Paul, which was destroyed. So again, this is history that is often kind of swept under the rug. I went on I-94 many times, and as I mentioned, lived in that area and knew nothing about it. So it's really wonderful to have her on to talk with us. And we appreciate all of your support and helping make interviews like this possible. We come here every week to talk to the creators of diverse books for children and teens, and your support of this nonprofit is what makes that happen. And also to provide resources like Read Your World Day and our classroom kit, which are all available for free. So of course we have a fundraiser happening right now, started on Giving Tuesday, and it's going to go through Read Your World Day, which is at the end of January. So any support you're able to give will help us keep being able to do interviews like this. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking to Debra J. Stone about her new book, The House on Rondo. And Rondo is a neighborhood in St. Paul that was destroyed with the building of a highway. And as she makes a note of in her book, this is actually something that that happened in many different communities. If I can show you, she actually has a list here of many communities around the country where this happened, where Black or brown neighborhoods were destroyed in the name of so-called progress, which of course did not benefit the people who had been living in those neighborhoods. And that was with the building of they were bulldozed to build interstate highways and things of that nature. And so we're going to be learning more about that. And as she mentions, this is not even a complete list of all the neighborhoods that were affected. And we'll be talking about this book that talks about one in particular in Minnesota. So hang on just a minute. Hello.
Hello. Had a little trouble there.
That's all right. So good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
Yes, I was just talking a little bit about your book, but why don't you go ahead and,
There
yes.
you go.
If you could go ahead and introduce yourself for those that don't know you. And I'm curious, how did you become a writer or an author? What was your journey?
Well, I am a native of Minnesota and I have lived here most of my life. I live in Minneapolis now. And before I started my journey as an author, I was active in theater and I had lived in Chicago for about 20 years. And when I moved back to Minnesota, I took some classes, some writing classes at this really well-known writing resource here in Minnesota called The Loft. And so I took some classes and I had some success with literary journals that I published short stories and poems. And then it just kind of kept bugging me, this thing about Rondo. My mother grew up on Rondo. I visited, like my character Zenobia, every Sunday. My grandparents, who still lived on Rondo, faithfully every Sunday we would go there.
Mhm.
So that's basically my journey as a writer. I've always written, but it really started bugging me. It was like an obsession I had.
Mhm.
So I had to write this. And this
And
is my first novel.
so, did you always imagine it as a story for this age group? How did you decide to write it as a middle grade novel?
It was just happened. I mean, I had not really Zenobia's age was an age that I was familiar with. I used to work in education with children, young people at the ages of 13 and 15. So I knew that age group, and I just thought it would be a good character to play with, and that's how I got. It wasn't really planned; it just happened that way. Sometimes you get those gifts.
Mhm. Well, I love how it worked out because on the one hand, you're telling the story of Rondo, but it's also Zenobia's story as she's kind of coming to, decide what her role, like using her own voice and deciding what role she's going to play in the community versus what her parents want her to do or her grandparents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. As her mother said, she had some trepidations about having her grandparents take care of her child when she was ill because she knew how strong-willed she was. And that's Zenobia. And I know that age group well, and they are. When they make up their minds, they're pretty sure of themselves, even though
Well,
you might have to grab them back.
yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting age. But maybe I should back up first. And I gave a little introduction to the book, but can you tell us a little more about it?
Well, it's set in the Rondo neighborhood in 1963. Unfortunately, Zenobia is planning on spending her summers in North Minneapolis because that's where she lived with her parents and her siblings, her brother Mookie and her sister Fanny. Unfortunately, her mother gets very sick and she has to take uh, her summer in the Rondo neighborhood with her grandparents. So, and before that, Rondo, getting to St. Paul is kind of a journey. The only way you could get there was to use University Avenue, which was one of the main arteries between Minneapolis and St. Paul at that time before the interstate highway came through. So now she's pouty, she's not happy. All her friends are going to be swimming, and now she's going to be with her grandparents. But she has as many friends in the Rondo neighborhood as she does in her Minneapolis neighborhood. So she joins in with her friends and they play the games that children play, like King of the Hill and hopscotch and baseball, and there are parties. But in the back of her mind, she sees that the houses are being torn down, that the mud and the grit and these huge earth moving machines are coming into the neighborhood and they're digging trenches where the houses have been knocked down and removed. And so there's all these different people in the Rondo neighborhood, and she sees them and she knows that there's something wrong. There's something, people are getting notices underneath their door. It's making her grandparents very unhappy. And then she finds out that they're losing their home. And
Mm.
so once that happens, she's really curious on what is she going to do? Why isn't her grandfather doing something about that? And it's all about the intricacies of political power that the Black community did not have at that time. There is one very feisty neighborhood person, Miss Ruby Pearl, ex-cowgirl, who decides that she's not leaving her home. And she uses her roping skills.
I just want to
There's,
show that picture
yes,
to include what she might have looked like. Yeah.
what she might have looked like. There's
Mhm.
an interesting story about that. There is actually a woman that my grandparents knew who was a part of the rodeo system. And unfortunately, I could not use her actual picture because it's just as nice as that one, but I couldn't get the rights to it. Her family members wouldn't let me have the rights. But needless to say, in my research, the Smithsonian African American Institute had a variety of pictures of what Black Westerns people look like.
Shut a second. And
Yes.
I mean, you have such great pictures in here. I want to get to that in a minute, but first to go back to the story. So Zenobia, she's in this situation. She sees things happening, and none of the adults will tell her what's going on, and they usually just tell her that's grown-up business. Don't get
Right.
involved. Although she does get
She does.
involved in a very big way. What do you want young people to that are reading this to kind of take away, thinking about their own role in the community?
I think it's important that they be very cognizant of how things can happen. I'm thinking of the young people like Tamir Rice, who was shot. So it is dangerous. And I think there are ways that young people can be active in their community. They can definitely write opinions using those skills of writing in class. They can use their voices in speaking up in class, learning their history, learning the history of their community, learning about their community leaders. There's different ways they can join environmental groups, help in cleaning up the environment. We have Friends of the Mississippi, where I see a lot of young people involved in picking up trash along the Mississippi River. So there are numerous ways that young people can get involved in their community. And I think it's important that they do. There are also young people who get involved in voting rights, helping people register. There's a lot of things that young people can do. You just have to be careful. I mean, activism can be dangerous.
Well, and I was thinking of that too with Zenobia. I don't know. I don't want to give away too much, but she does really get in trouble, and it could have been a lot worse for her. But
Yes, it could.
um, one reviewer described the house on Rondo as a love letter to Rondo, an ode to the strength and vitality of Black communities. And as you made clear in the book, I actually showed a picture of that. Hold on, a minute ago. This is only one of many, and you say this is not even a complete list.
Not even.
Many neighborhoods where this happened. Why is it so? What was so special about these communities that you wanted people to know about? Not just about their being destroyed, but what was so special about Rondo to begin with?
Well, everybody focuses on the destruction of those Black communities, but I wanted to focus on the joy and the love and the smartness of that community. I mean, in those communities, because of redlining is where, Black people were contained into certain neighborhoods because they couldn't buy homes in other neighborhoods, primarily white neighborhoods. So that was a exciting time because you had lawyers and doctors and stores and if, musicians that all lived in this neighborhood, as well as some unsavory folks too. But in that environment, there were many opportunities for young Black people to see how the neighborhood functioned and who these people were in their neighborhood. And that's why I, not only in the Rondo neighborhood, but in many of the communities, I'm thinking of the community in Tulsa where Black Wall Street, I mean, you had a vibrant banks, stores, just real strong economic development in those communities. And that is what was lost, is the generational wealth of homeowners, business owners, people who had already really struggled very hard to make their communities vibrant and economically viable.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought was fascinating about it is that you include so many of the details. I mean, one, as you say, this is when you talk about this issue, it involves politics and economics, and there's as you say, it's very intricate. But you do such a great job of kind of explaining it to make it more understandable for young readers, especially. I mean, even for me, like it helped me kind of understand the bigger issues of it. Um, but it is historical fiction, but you include
Yes.
so many details about life. And I showed one of the pictures. I mean, I'd like to show a few others, like these wonderful pictures about life. How did you balance including that much historical detail with the storytelling aspect of it? Did you ever have times where you really wanted to include something you think, oh, that's going to weigh the story down too much? How did you figure out how to do that?
You nailed it. I did not want to nail. I did not want to weigh the story down too much. I wanted to keep it focused, but including those photographs, it gives a realness, a reality of what that community was like before I-94 came through, and how the communities, both Minneapolis and St. Paul, really enjoyed each other. My mother, in reality, did marry a man from the north side of Minneapolis. And so there was a lot of community activism as well as a lot of playtime. There were basketball games between the settlement houses, which are Phyllis Wheatley and Hallie Q. Brown. Those are the most famous ones here in Minnesota. And there were baseball games and football games and basketball games. And that is a photo of the basketball game between Hallie Q and Phyllis Wheatley. And so I wanted to express how important those communities, both Minneapolis and St. Paul, Black communities, were to each other, because it didn't matter to Black folks where you were from. They all had their own little territories, but everybody kind of went back and forth quite often.
And I think most people, if you haven't been to Minnesota, most people have this impression of Minnesota as being very white. You
Yes.
think of the Scandinavian history, and people may not know how deep the roots are of the African American community in Minnesota. And so, why is it so important for kids to have this history? I mean, you kind of mentioned that before. Young people getting involved is important for them to know the history of their community. And even Zenobia, this is taking place in 1963. Her
Right.
parents and grandparents are teaching her about the history from before then. Why is it so important for kids to know this kind of history?
Well, I think it's important because the reality is everybody wants to focus on the negativeness, and you know they want to make believe that Black people only were involved in slavery, and that's not the case. Minnesota has a rich history of Native people as well as early Black, I should say, African descent people who were fur traders in northern Minnesota. There were farms in northern Minnesota that were being farmed by people of African descent. So there is a rich history of people of color here in Minnesota, Native and African people. And so it is I kind of got down the rabbit hole because it was so fascinating. George Bonga, who is a fur trader of African descent, who I really wanted to throw him in the book, but
Okay.
will be a later project. But as it is, I really want to show that the migration of people of African descent, they didn't all go to the big cities of Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, but a lot more people than you thought moved west, like my grandparents. They moved to western Nebraska, and then I have other stories about people of African descent who settled in Wyoming and Montana. So there was a big exodus, and they were called exodusters. The failure of Reconstruction moved people west, and there was a terrible time between that end of the Civil War, the failure of Reconstruction, where lynching was everywhere. And so Black families wanted to go places where they did not have to worry about their young men and their young women being lynched. And they wanted land. You know, Black people were
Linda,
farming.
I was
Yeah,
looking for that. I found that so fascinating because here I thought I was reading a book about Minnesota, but so much of it is about a community in Nebraska, which again is a kind of a history that most people don't know about.
right. And that's how um, the story of Zenobia's grandparents, they moved from their settlement in Nebraska, the Sandhills of Nebraska and Western Nebraska, to St. Paul, Minnesota, primarily because of the Depression. They, like many, lost their farms, and there was a dust bowl. There was not, the climate change is another factor. I mean, farming and ranching are not easy. And so they picked up their stuff and moved to St. Paul. And the railroad was the Great Northern Railroad was James Hill was also significant in which many Black people became part of the railroad system.
Mm. Well, can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, we're getting close on time, but I was really fascinated about your research process because you do mention kind of in the notes at the back that it was really difficult, one, to find the photos or just to find much archival evidence of what Rondo was like. So how did you go about kind of reconstructing, obviously your own memories of being there, but as you mentioned, you were a child when you visited. So how
Right.
did you go about doing research on it?
Um, Fortunately, I have some very good oral history from that I've taken from relatives and people who lived in former residents of Rondo, as well as the Minnesota Historical Society has some archives, as well as at that time I there was COVID, and so I had to do a lot of research online. And the Smithsonian Institute is also very good at finding archival information, but one has to be careful. I mean, the archives don't tell you everything. You have to kind of like fill in those spaces that are too white and really rethink how America looked like from some of the knowledge that you get from your ancestors
Mm.
and people that you know who have oral histories. And I paid attention to a lot of the oral histories um, of of people and the slave narratives that are part of the archives from the 1930s during the Depression. So that is kind of a way in which writers can fill in the archives that are missing
Mm.
about Native people and Black people.
Well, congratulations on your book. It is really wonderful. I just finished it recently and really enjoyed it. And so I'm curious, what's next for you? You mentioned maybe you had some other writing projects in mind. Do you think you're going to keep on writing for this age group, or what do you have planned?
I don't know. It would be fun. I'm looking one of the readings I was at. One of the audience members said, "Wow, those cowboys are really interesting. Are
Hmm.
you going to write something about the cowboys of African descent and the cowgirls?"
Yeah.
And I said, that is a really good idea. So
Mm.
I'm kind of following through with that.
Mm. I could see that. I think Ruby Pearl deserves a book. She is.
I think
She
she
was one of
does
my
too.
favorites. Yes.
I think she does too.
Well, for anybody who hasn't read it, I highly recommend it. Such wonderful characters, important history for kids to know, and also just a good story. I mean, of a
I think
girl
so.
stuck somewhere in the summer where she doesn't want to be, but she figures out how to make it work. So,
Yeah,
and some of it, less people think this is a really heavy book. I mean, it definitely does have heart, but also has a lot of humor. And Zenobia and her kind of attitude towards being there for the summer is some of my favorite. So really wonderful
Thank you.
characters in writing. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for joining us and congratulations.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And for anybody that joined us late, this will be up on Instagram in just a few minutes, and later we'll have the whole thing on YouTube if you'd rather watch it that way. So thank you so much to Deborah for joining us, and thanks to all of you for watching.
Thank you. Bye from
Bye.
cold Minnesota.